going to talk a bit about Teach First and basically some of the lessons of scaling over the last 15 years. I'm basing a bit of the talk on this Brookings paper that I wrote, which I could send people a link to, and then have some time for question and answer afterwards. So it's great to be here in this conference, to be with so many fantastic educators and amazing individuals from around the world who are doing such wonderful things in education. So I want to start the talk by imagining we're in a different context. Imagine we're in some sort of alternative universe, and we're living in a country that's extremely nice place, really lovely place to live, wonderful in so many different ways, but it has one very bizarre practice, this country, one very strange practice of how it operates. And this bizarre practice is that the country has decided to allocate its top jobs in business, technology, in creative services, in the professions, government, in all the main jobs, and it's decided to give these jobs to children at birth, just randomly. Not waiting to find out about these children's aptitudes or appetites, not waiting to find out about what the child's really passionate about or what their potential is. So in this country, where you end up is almost entirely dependent on where you start off. There's hardly any relationship between working hard and winning big, and because of this bizarre practice, this country is tolerant of millions of its children and its citizens being denied the chance to even realize a proportion of their potential. So as I'm guessing you all guessed, this country is a real country, and it's many countries around the world. Maybe it might be your country, but it's definitely Great Britain, the country that I live in. And this isn't a practice stuck in some feudal past, like it would have been if you had gone to medieval Britain, but instead it's a practice that continues today. This is what my organization is trying to change. We're a charity, and we're trying to change the situation. And we come with the vision that no child's educational success and no child's ability to achieve all sorts of things should be limited by their socioeconomic background, but should be much more about their own potential and their own hard work. Amongst the many things we do, at our heart, we've introduced this new model to train and recruit teachers and get the country's top talent to become teachers and work long-term as leaders in the education field, working towards this mission. What's unique about Teach First is we inspire these top teachers to tackle inequality in education. We place them in schools serving the lowest income communities. We discover, deploy, and develop the power of people to create people-powered change. And in the end, our belief is it's all about people-powered change. I just heard Thomas Friedman speak about Moore's Law, the power of machine, all the changes going on in the world. But in the end, at its core, we still believe education and the change that needs to happen is people-powered change, and that people and the best leaders need to focus on the change necessary for young people from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. We believe in the talent and potential of every young person, and we want to see it realized. And when I say this, when we say every young people, it's always useful to picture a young person in your mind. And the young person I often picture is someone I met in a visit to Grimsby, a town in the northeastern corner of England. Has anyone here been to Grimsby before? Ah, we do, a few Grimsby. Okay, good. Named after the Norse king, King Grim, but unfortunately it doesn't sound great in English, that name. I visited a while ago, and it's had an industrial base that it's lost. It had a fishing industry that's mostly lost, and it's a bit of a, as a town, it's a real struggling place, struggling with jobs and struggling with a sense of identity. Like many charities and organizations, Grimsby is a difficult place to get to. We weren't there yet, and very few organizations get there over time. It doesn't have many good partners. It's not a place that's top on our list to go to. Businesses don't really want to support us to go to Grimsby because they don't have some work in Grimsby. It's hard to get funding for it. Graduates don't really want to go to Grimsby. It's just kind of difficult to get to, and it's a place that you put in the best to do later list rather than a priority list. It's a town so far down in its luck that its football team, and football is a big part of the identity in English towns, is actually playing in a neighboring town. It's not actually playing Grimsby. This is something almost every child I spoke to in Grimsby mentioned as a problem in the town. So it's a town that has some difficulties. When I was there, I visited a primary school for a tour, and the head teacher told me that he didn't believe any of his parents were in full-time work, in full-time traditional work. and the difficulty that gave him in working with the young people there, the students, and helping them get prepared for their own futures. While I was touring the school, I met a 10-year-old boy who's sandy hair and very cheeky, very, asking lots of questions, very interested in chat quite a bit. And he said he was in the school's council as a 10-year-old. So we'll call him Jack. And he asked me what I did. I told him about the charity. I said, we recruit teachers, place them. We believe, we want all teachers to be outstanding. His eyes lit up as a 10-year-old. And he said, great, when are you going to be working in my school? When are we going to get these teachers? When's it happening here? As a student council member, I want to make sure you come here very soon. And I told him, honestly, I didn't know, it would take a while to get to Grimsby. There's all sorts of practical issues. We had to get the funding. We had to figure out this. We had to figure out that. He couldn't care less. And he said to me, well, then you're not much of a charity then, are you? What good are you? And he sort of stormed off, as 10-year-olds do. And the truth was, why should he care about my practical issues as the head of a charity, as a CEO of a charity, getting to his school? That wasn't something that he should worry about. And he was absolutely right. We were obligated to get to Grimsby and get to his school as soon as possible. And all I was doing was making excuses for why we couldn't help him, why we couldn't ensure that our vision became a reality for him. And he was absolutely right. We weren't treating him the way we should have. So I'm going to tell you 4 lessons that I've learned over time on how you can grow a charity, how you can scale, and how you can get to serve children like Jack who deserve the charity's benefits. Over the last 12 years, we've scaled 20% annually. Making us the largest graduate recruiter in the UK. We just beat PricewaterhouseCoopers, who's now number 2. Not that's competition. We are recruiting 1,700 teachers a year, and one of the very few charities actually in the UK to scale successfully. London now has more than 1 in 10 of all the teachers in the city are Teach First teachers. More than 1 in 10 of the teachers in low-income schools are Teach First teachers, and it's now one of the best cities in Europe to go to school. In fact, children from low-income communities in London are now achieving, on average, higher than the national average for all pupils. And it's done so well at raising aspirations that if all schools across the UK did as well as London schools, next year the gap between richer and poorer children in England would be reduced by 2/3. After 15 years now, our reach, though, isn't just in London. We started as a London program, but we're now all over England and Wales, including in Grimsby, where we just got to a few years ago, and I'll tell you more about that. We're working with over 1,000 schools and providing 1 in 4 of all new teachers in low-income schools across the country. So how did we get to this growth, starting from a small base in London to a national scale? So I think there's been 4 secrets to this growth over the last 15 years. The first is a scaling mentality. From our earliest days, I knew that for Teach First to be truly successful in changing the impact for children, we needed to have this scaling mentality. Even our first year, the government wanted us to start with 50 teachers, and I played sort of some high-stakes poker with the civil servants and said, look, I wouldn't do it for 50 teachers. We would just cancel the whole thing, and they would have to tell their minister why it wasn't working. And I said, I wouldn't do it for less than 250 teachers. And we haggled a bit, and we ended up at 180 teachers that we started with. To me, it was really important that we started big so that we could scale more, so we could have a convening, enough numbers to convene, that we could have a bit of power, that we could have a much more equitable relationship with some of our partners. And I felt it wouldn't work if this was just a small program to start out with. You need that scaling mentality to believe in your vision and to feel an urgency to help make this vision a reality to as many children as quickly as possible. I think you need to think of the children who aren't helped if you don't scale. And that's why I want to tell you the story of Jack when we started off of. In my head, I always think of Jack or some child like him. The children in Grimsby may not be sitting around our board tables. They aren't sitting around our board tables. No one in our board has met Jack. None of our senior leaders know who Jack is. But yet, it's my job as CEO to make sure Jack's voice is constantly heard at all the strategic decision meetings. While corporates have shareholders as their ultimate beneficiaries who are represented on the board tables, we need to remember that these unserved children are our ultimate beneficiaries. We need to articulate the ambition in a powerful and compelling manner while demonstrating the urgency to achieve this. We need to build the support and scaling mentality within our board to back a plan and our senior staff who are vital to make it a reality. Now, the problem with so many charities is both boards and senior staff have a lot to lose if this growth happens. So Jack has a lot to gain, but Jack isn't around the table. The people who have a lot to lose are around the table, and I think this is often one of the things that holds charities back from having this scaling mentality. Senior employees may find themselves demoted by scale if they can't keep up their skill growth with the organizational growth. We've had many people who are fantastic leaders for an organization of 50 employees. When we get to 500 employees, they haven't been able to scale, and they've had to either get demoted down in the organization or they've had to leave. There's all sorts of difficulties that come with growth for the actual employees who are working in the organization. It makes it very difficult. Boards, on the other hand, worry that additional growth might bring risks. All sorts of charities can grow and collapse, or there's all sorts of things that can happen that can embarrass a board with growth. And it's much easier as a board to have a nice, stable, safe charity that's doing a good job, rather than a board that's growing and really getting bigger and having much bigger impact, because it's also much riskier. I think your job, my job as a CEO, your job as other leaders, is to ensure that whenever these decisions are being made with employees, with board members, is to have that scaling mentality and always picture Jack or the similar people who aren't being served if you don't scale, and ensure that you try to serve those people as soon as possible. I think the second lesson we had was the big tent approach. You need to build a tent big enough for your ambition. Small-scale interventions can work independently outside the system, but if you want to make a difference at scale, you have to have the sensibility on how the system works, and while you need to be disrupting, you have to find ways to work with and not against the grain of your system. For Teach First, this has meant that we always ensured we built support and sought to be an addition to the system rather than a replacement. So in my head, I always think of us much more as a Trojan horse than a battering ram. I think it's very easy to have that battering ram mentality as a charity, and often it's very difficult to scale. I think if you have much more of a Trojan horse mentality, you're trying to get in and change the system from the inside, working with the system to make that change. That's a much more scalable mentality. We've never relied on the support of one political party, because governments change all the time. In 2002, when we started, I had lots of meetings with the Conservative Party leadership, even though they were a very tiny political party at the time, and people thought it would be ages before they got back in government. Michael Gove's here. I remember meeting with him in opposition, meeting with him when he became Shadow Education Minister. And then when he did become Secretary of State, we were one of the few charities that was supported by Labor that he decided to continue government support with. Vital for us, too, were universities. There were and remain the main lead in teacher training, and having the backing of some from the start allowed us to see show them how much we value their expertise, which we wanted to build on, not replace. And I think the same goes with unions. Some initiatives rightly face skepticism from a reform-wary profession, but being able to secure the early backing of a few influential and key individuals within unions helped ensure acceptance within the sector for us. I think too often those starting up a new idea or new approach try and do it alone. They believe they have to try and use their disruptive innovation to plow their own path. But true change and impact is much more powerful when you utilize the efforts of others. And we've been blessed to Teach First by a range of brilliant partners and supporters who have always wanted to be part of what we wanted to do, and we've tried to bring them into the tent as much as possible and make them a core part of what Teach First is. I mean, the list of people without whom Teach First wouldn't be successful would be impossible, because it would take up the whole time of this talk, from so many university professors who perfected our training, to brave head teachers who embraced our disruption from the start, to business allies who provided our funding, policymakers from every political party who took leaps of faith to try something new, and to teachers, teaching profession, and union members who welcomed our teachers into their folds. And what's great about this network and this movement is that now gone much wider than Teach First. We've seen other charities open up that are doing similar work in policing, in social work, in mental health, and we've seen that educational equality has become a much bigger issue in the UK. So we've started a few years ago something even wider called the Fair Education Alliance, which now has about 100 members from businesses, other education organizations, charities, as we work more and more in partnership and in collaboration to make real national change, real scaled-up national change a reality, using that big tent approach. Sorry. So I think it's a very delicate and intentional balance. It's not easy. You need to work closely with and be supportive of the system, but also not shy away from being disruptive and trying to improve it. You know, it's a constant balance, and it's a constant ensuring you're getting it right between those two extremes. So the third lesson I have is the perfect versus the good. So I have scaling mentality, big tent, and the third would be perfect versus the good. We need to ensure that we don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Now, that doesn't mean accepting substandard activity or not investing in making detailed plans, but it's about always making a positive contribution and impact and learning as you go, having an approach that accepts some mistakes will be made and that's flexible and adaptable. and just hearing Thomas Friedman saying we always have to live in beta, where we always have to see that whatever we're doing, there's nothing that's finished. It's always about improving. And I think there's a mentality, I've seen some charity leaders, that they're waiting for their charity or whatever they're doing to be perfect in a small-scale pilot, and then they're going to grow it. And I have to say, over 15 years, I've never seen that happen. Never seen it happen. I've spoken to so many leaders of charities who have this fantastic idea in a small scale, ask them why they're not growing it, why aren't they scaling it? They say, well, we need to get it perfect. I'm still worried about that, still worried about this, and 5 years later, 10 years later, it still hasn't scaled. I think living in that beta idea that you're constantly improving, you're constantly trying to get it better, but being happy that you can scale it while that's happening is really important. Utilizing data has been central to our work, helping us see where we're having the greatest impact and where we're most needed, but it could also be a double-edged sword. If you're beholden to it, you can easily use it to justify not to do lots of things. There's always more data that's about to come. You could always make things a little bit better, and by the time all the evidence is available, it's too late or too difficult. Einstein once said, not everything that can be measured is important, and not everything important can be measured. And I think that's important to keep in mind even as you're using data. It's important to keep that balance. So I've seen too many board members and senior executives of charities waiting for that perfect piece of data or perfect model to get right before they scale. And ultimately, Jack in Grimsby is never going to get any advantages out of that. He's going to be lost. It's going to be years and years, if ever, that he's actually going to get the benefits of your work. As charities, let's not hold ourselves to higher standards than businesses do when they scale. Everyone needs us today, not tomorrow. Which brings me to my fourth and final point about being ready, the Boy Scouts mentality. Finally, you need to have this opportunity to seize opportunities when they arise, carpe diem. A great plan, the right mindset, and having broad-based support are all necessary to scale, but sometimes success is just being fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. Luck can have an important part to play, but you have to be ready, you have to spot the opportunity, and be willing to take the risk to make the most of it. Now, Teach First has benefited from this a number of times in our history. We've laid some important groundwork, but we've also developed at a time of growing teacher shortages, a decentralization of decision-making to schools, and on-the-job teacher training becoming more accepted. We made sure to take advantage of the winds when they blew in our direction. We had once a situation where Gordon Brown, as chancellor, wanted to make a big announcement, and he was struggling to figure out what he would announce in his budget. And we got announced that he wanted to grow Teach First, which we weren't able to do in that time scale. We were able to use that to get funding for some of our growth. When Michael Gove took over as education secretary in the change of government in 2010, he knew he wanted to grow some big reforms very quickly, and we were ready for it. And we had the funding and support, which has enabled us to triple in size over the last 6 years. So to summarize, I think we've been successful because we've been clear about what we're doing, and also because we've had that scaling mentality from the beginning. We've used the big tent approach. We haven't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and we've been ready when the opportunities have arisen. We've always tried to ensure that those unserved children, like that unserved child in Grimsby, are in the front of our minds. So that last year, I did go back to Grimsby again, and we're now placing quite a lot of teachers there. We're one of the very few charities actually working in Grimsby. I meet lots of charities, and they're telling me about their scaling thoughts, and it's always in London and Manchester, Birmingham. Very rarely do they actually get to some of these areas because they're very difficult to get to. And I'm always pushing, how can you scale in the areas that the children need you the most? I went back to the school where I met Jack, and it was the same head teacher there, and now that head teacher has hired quite a lot of Teach First teachers, including in senior leadership. That head teacher has done quite a lot to improve the school. Some of our teachers have had a major role there. And I think it was actually a really positive visit. I left that school feeling very excited. But as I left the school, the one thing that was depressing is obviously Jack wasn't there. He had already left the school. We were too late for him. I have no idea what happened to him. I have no idea what happened to him in secondary school. But I can tell you we weren't able to benefit him in the way he needed. But hopefully we'll be able to do that for the next generation of Jacks who are going through that school in Grimsby. So thank you. So now I don't know how much time I have, but we could do questions. Oh, sure.
My name is Maarit Rossi and I'm from Finland. I would like to know a little bit more how you actually scale.
So actually how we scaled, with Teach First, I always felt there were 4 things we needed to scale. I guess 4 is my number today. So one was, could we recruit more graduates? That was one constraint. Could we find schools to place them in that wanted our teachers? Because in England, schools recruit the teachers and hire the teachers. Do we have enough money to scale? And do we have the organizational capacity to scale? So my mentality over the last 15 years has always been to believe we want to scale. Let's get as big as we can as quickly as possible. And here are the 4 things holding us back. How can we overcome these 4 constraints? That's always been my mentality. So each one has had a different constraint at different times. At points, money was the big constraint, in which case I focused on government or private sector getting us more money. At other points, it was organizational capacity, building just a stronger organization. I think today our biggest constraint is graduate recruitment, that we'd like to grow to 2,000 from 1,700. And we have some money now. We have organizational capacity. We have the schools that want us. But it's finding enough graduates who meet our standards. So for each one, so as a result, that's our strategy now, is how do we improve our graduate recruitment? And it's really focusing on the constraint to scale at any given time and trying to overcome that constraint. Hi.
Hi, my name's Suze. I'd like to know how you define top talent.
So we define top talent in a very specific way, which is around these competencies. So we have 8 competencies we look for, which are based on our values, and they're around communication skills, they're around leadership skills, they're around, really they're around being able to be a great teacher and a great leader who is focused on this vision of closing the gaps. I mean, that's how we look at top talent.
Thank you.
Brett?
Oh. Sorry.
Sorry. Did you have a way to systematize learning within the organization? Because obviously you're doing things new. You're in literally new territories. How did you ensure that the organization was learning quickly and changing what it was doing and moving on?
Yeah, and it's really difficult. So we have a research team that we've had in place for almost 10 years now, which is constantly looking at data and constantly looking, to improve. I think, for my mentality, and I think some of our other senior team, we've just constantly looked at Teach First as an unfinished organization, I think. And, our training program is an example where we, Ofsted said it was outstanding. We feel it's a pretty good training program. But we're aware there's all sorts of weaknesses in our training program, from feedback we were getting from our teachers, from some of the data we were seeing. And so, the last few years, we've really changed our training program in a very deep way because we think, actually, we can get it better. So I think it's that mentality, right, of constant improvement and trying to use data to feed that constant improvement.
Rena Diab, I'm from Palestine. How did you convince the government and the unions that you're not competing with them for recruiting teachers in the very traditional way?
So in some ways, when we started, there was a real shortage of teachers. So everyone was desperate for more teachers. I mean, I always say Teach First that's not our job, really. Teacher vacancies isn't why we exist, even though some people think we do. Really our job is to build a long-term leadership movement who are going to change society. But what was easy in the government when we started, and now, the government wants more teachers, basically, and they feel there's not enough teachers in, so we're helping them solve a problem. We're helping schools solve a problem. I think unions, we worked very closely with unions, and we still do, to really be open to them that our teachers meet the qualifications that they're looking for, and that they're going to be good members of the profession working there. So, it's been basically lots of dialogue, I would say, with the unions. Yeah.
Hi. Could I ask you to reflect a little on the status of teachers in society? Because it varies a great deal from country to country. And what effect do you think you've had, if any, on the status of teachers in the UK?
I think we've had a positive effect. So, I mean, there's a big survey, the Times does this big graduate survey of what are the top graduate jobs based on perception. And last year we were ranked number 3, basically. I think Google and PwC were the number 1 and 2. So, if you think what Teach First is about is teaching in a low-income school and helping raise the standards of low-income kids. And that's the third most prestigious job in the UK right now, according to this gold standard survey. So, I mean, that's one, I think, positive thing. You know, I mean, when we started 15 years ago, I met with the head of careers at Oxford who said there were 5 of his graduates who went to teach in a state school that year. And now, you know, we're getting maybe 5 to 10% of their graduates applying, as one example. So in the past, I think it would have been pretty unusual for a top university graduate to say, I'm going to go teach in this low-income school. It would have just been seen very unusual. Now I think most top graduates have friends who are teaching in low-income schools. You know, everyone has friends or knows people on Teach First or teaching these schools. So I think that does change the prestige. I mean, it's not where it needs to be. I think there's more improvements that need to happen. But at least that's opening up the profession more, I would say. Yeah, 2 minutes? Okay. Was there 2 more questions? Oh, sure.
Hi. Once you train the teachers, for how long do they stay in the job? Do they stay? Because where I come from, usually a teacher is a teacher and is a teacher for life.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's not the case. And also, if you train them initially, now that you are 15 years old, do you go back at some point? Like maybe when they reach the 10-year milestone, maybe they need a refresh or an update or something like that?
Yeah, those are good questions. So, so the first thing is, actually, we're doing a lot more. Our big growth area now is supporting, we call them ambassadors. After the 2 years, we don't have alumni because we say alumni, you're finished with something. I see at least one ambassador in the room, maybe there's more. But ambassadors are people who continue in this mission, speaking at GEMS or doing whatever for the rest of their careers. And we want all of our ambassadors to stay in this mission. So we're doing a lot more helping ambassadors move into middle and senior leadership roles in schools and training them. And actually, this is a big thing we're bringing to the board in the next few months about even doing more on this area because I think it's really important for our mission. Most of our people do stay in teaching. About 60% or so stay in teaching. A lot more are doing things like speaking at GEMS or running charities or working in policy or doing other things around this mission. I think the change mentality that we would say is, I don't think most top graduates want to go into a school and stay there for 40 years anymore. And I think, you know, and I think governments and countries, my personal view is, should be open to the fact that actually good talent want to move around and do different things in their careers, and that's really healthy. You know, you don't necessarily want children to be just only, I mean, I just visited a school, which I won't name, which in the hills somewhere in a very rural area, where the lunch lady mentioned to me, I walked around the school and said, this is one of literally the worst schools I've seen in a while. I was really depressed, and I was chatting to the lunch lady, and she said, oh yeah, I've been here for 50 years. You know, almost all the teachers here I remember as students when they were here. You know, and because basically you talk to the teachers, and the only way you stay in this town with a professional job is you become a teacher, and then you just stay there the rest of your life. And it doesn't feel like a great place to go to school, actually. So I sometimes think, you know, having someone stay in a school for years isn't necessarily brilliant either. You need both, I think. And if there's one last question. Oh yes, hi. So yeah, this year we wanted to get about 2,000 teachers. We have about 11 or 12,000 applications, but we only found, I think we're going to end up having about 1,700 rather than the 2,000 we wanted. Communication. So it's interesting, especially for STEM teachers, we've been talking about it, and what else we can do around it. You know, there's such a demand for STEM teachers, maths and science teachers, engineering, and a lot of the communication, a lot of them fall down on some of the communication bars we're looking for. That's been a real issue. I would say that's at least one thing we've picked on that we were thinking maybe we can do some pre-work with some of them on that. Yeah, especially, it's interesting because that was the one, I'm sort of sharing some inside information, but like that's the one real statistically significant thing we saw, is which you'd believe, humanities graduates present a lot as part of their coursework, and they're overall much better communicators than maths or science graduates. And there's a huge demand for maths and science teachers. So this is something, you know, and we have the same bar for both teachers for that. And it's something that a lot of maths and science teachers are not meeting that bar. So it's something we're now beginning to think, can we, you know, maybe do pre-work with some of them or help them get to that bar in a different way. Yeah. No, thanks. Sorry I was late. I didn't.